Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar called COVID-19 Coronavirus Now, Next, and After. Apologies, everyone, for starting a minute late. Couldn't figure out how to share my screen with you all, but I think hopefully you should now all see the presentation. And hopefully you can see all of our faces as well. We're on video, which I think is, nice. While we're all keeping socially distant, we can still see our faces through the video. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you guys are all taking good care of yourselves and you're all well. So before we get started, let me go through a bit of housekeeping for the webinar today. All of you guys who are attending the webinar, you guys are in listen-only mode, so we can't hear you. But if you have any questions or comments, then please use your toolbar to submit them to me, and I'll be keeping an eye on those as we go through during the webinar. Feel free to send your questions anytime. We'll handle them at the end after we've done the presentations and hearing from our guests. Then we'll open the floor to questions, but you can send them in anytime. The webinar is based on a report which we published last week, which you can see the picture of up here, and there's a link in there as well that you guys can follow. But we have also made that downloadable as a PDF. So you should have a handouts toolbar where you can download both the slides from today's event as well as the report. So feel free to download those during the session. Finally, when this is all over, we will share a recording of the webinar with everyone within the next couple of days. So that's it for housekeeping. Next up, I would just like to introduce everybody here. So you can see me on the far left. I'm Amy Cameron. As you can see, I've had a bit of a haircut since that picture was taken, and I'm a senior analyst at STL Partners, and I'm going to be moderating today, so handling the questions and all of that. Then we have our research director, Andrew Collinson.
Hi, everyone. As you can see, I'm not wearing my glasses today, but hopefully you'll be able to tell me apart from the others, because we've all sort of swapped around our glasses and appearance.
Next up, we have Dean Bubley, who's an associate with STL Partners and also runs his own shop with Disruptive Analysis. I think you're on mute, Dean, but that's okay. Next up, we have Markus Kinnunen, who's joining us from Elisa, where he's the VP of Service Assurance and Cybersecurity.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Dr. Rainer Deutschmann, who's a Group Chief Operating Officer at Dialog Axiata in Sri Lanka.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Thank you guys all for joining us, and especially Markus and Rainer for coming here to share your experiences. So a quick overview of our agenda for today. What we're going to do is we're going to look first at how telcos are responding to the current situation. What are they doing for their customers? What's happening in some different markets? And then we'll hear specifically from Markus and Rainer some of what they're doing in their own markets. After that, we will look at some long-term scenarios, what the world might look like in 2025 and what that will mean for telecoms operators, sort of different parts of their businesses, and we'll get that from Dean. And then finally, we'll have a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask the panelists all your questions, and we'll probably do that for 15 or 20 minutes. And we'll have a hard stop at 4. If we have lots of questions, then we'll take the full hour. So that's our plan for today. And without further ado, I will hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Amy. So I'd just like to reiterate what Amy said. Thank you all for joining us today. We genuinely hope you and your families, your friends and colleagues are safe and well, and our wishes are with anyone who is not in that situation. Clearly, what we're talking about here is a very serious and horrible thing. We decided to, Dean and I and Amy have been working on this for about two and a half weeks. We decided to try to look not at the medical issues, because we're not medical experts, although we look quite a lot at healthcare, but at how we think it's affecting telecoms, particularly telecoms operators, but the industry. So we try to think about how it would affect operators, their customers, and the economy that they serve in general. And so what we're going to try and do is provide an overview of those things collectively between us. So we've got a mixture of experience. We've got Dean and myself from the analytical side, thinking about with our typical analyst hats, thinking about the future and scenarios and all that kind of stuff. And then we've got some people like Markus and Rainer who are in the real world, actually running important parts of telcos, who are going to share a little more about what they've been doing. So to start with, I mean, the first heading here is we're in it for the long term. One of the things that's very apparent to us, I think in the UK, and I know it's different in different parts of the world, but this really isn't a short-term disruption. We think it will have long-term effects on a number of things. First of all, healthcare, clearly. There's a big challenge in that area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. But I think also importantly, behaviorally, it will change behaviors of consumers, of businesses, how we operate, and how various things return over time. We expect it to take some time and to end up somewhat different than it was when it started. Although of course nobody's sure, and that's kind of what we've done by looking at some scenarios which Dean will talk through and say, you know, if these things happen to greater or less extent, what do we expect? And last but not least, there's the political dimension to this, in that it's unclear at the moment how the politics of this will play out, both nationally and internationally, and that I think will be one of the big determinants of the long-term situation. But again, we'll come on to that with the scenarios. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the near-term pieces. So first of all, I mean, I think we've all seen this a lot in the last few weeks. Telcos are definitely doing a lot of good things and potentially can do more. A colleague of mine mentioned that on a call with one of Markus's colleagues, actually from Elisa, it was described as there's a new Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where connectivity is now as important as the physiological needs. And I think we've probably all seen that in our societies and our cultures, how reliant people have become on connectivity and all the benefits that that brings. And for the most part, from what I've seen, the telecoms operators have been coping tremendously well, and look forward to hearing a bit more from Markus about that and the effect on the network, and also from Rainer. There's also been some very good customer support from operators, and I have to say it's been nice to see that. Some other industries, certainly in our country, have not got it right, the way they've treated their customers and employees, and by and large, from what I've seen, operators are doing a great job of that, and we'll share some of those ideas. And our original idea was to share those ideas so that if you are in an operator, you might think of copying some of these ideas, because you can't help your customers too much in this environment. And we're not really covering this, but operators have done a pretty good job with their employees too, from what I've seen as well. So, you know, I think pretty much everyone on this call will be working from home. I've been very impressed by, you know, the general commitment of telecoms as employers, but also as employees. You know, we've seen a great response, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So, I'd like now to talk about some of the longer term aspects that we're talking about here. And those of you who kind of read our stuff or follow us a little bit know we have a thing called the coordination age. The coordination age is how we see the future that we're now in. And it's all about the efficient use of resources, whether those resources be money, time, healthcare, education, all of those things. And what we've seen is a trend of, or general trends in society, which are all about better use of resources. And what we believe is that, like, you know, what happens in crises like the coronavirus crisis, it tends to accelerate, or if not accelerate, it produces almost like an earthquake or something, a kind of an opportunity for trends to move at an accelerated pace, sometimes backwards, mostly forwards. And the kind of trends that I'm sure you're all seeing are a move towards more remote methods of working, shopping, getting things done, healthcare. All of those things have become very much more, very quickly gone online and via communications medium. And you know, likewise, home working, getting deliveries in the UK. I don't know so much about the rest of the world, but it's very much turned to a kind of home shopping environment in the UK and elsewhere. And we believe that these things will last, not necessarily at the state that they're in today, but when people have been introduced to new behaviors and they've had an opportunity to practice them for several weeks, if not months, and it probably will be months in many cases, some of it tends to stick. And so we believe that some of what we are seeing now will last. Not all of it, because clearly there's a lot of things we'd all like to get back to doing, but we won't be able to. So it is going to produce lasting changes in behavior. And along with that, things like energy use and logistics are big areas. And these are areas which we've been looking at and saying, when you think about the resources question, logistics and energy use are big areas, as well as things like healthcare. So we believe that the crisis itself will not shift those backwards, they'll shift them forwards, and they'll jump forward a bit, because people will be introduced to them at a faster rate than they would otherwise done. And however, there are some possibly not so positive things here. I mean, as we know, there's terrible things happening in healthcare. One thing we've pulled out is to talk about 5G. I've seen some talk saying it won't affect 5G. I find that a little bit unlikely, because in an environment where you have people worrying about economics at a very fundamental, economics and safety at a very fundamental level, it's hard to see people worrying about what their next phone is going to be. As much as we'd like to be going back to that quickly, I don't think that's going to be the case. And I think whilst businesses and individuals are going to be thinking very carefully about their economic challenges, they're certainly not going to stop communicating or stop being connected. I'm not sure they're going to leap forward, and I'm not sure 5G offers at the moment the leap forward that they want or need. That's not to say it will stop. And obviously there's a lot of things in place now to move 5G forward, but I think it will certainly slow and be more cautious. And we're obviously covering that in other research, so I'm not going to go too on about that, but I think it's one immediate effect of this. Other things that we think are, we think that operators should take this opportunity to focus on the new customer needs. You might say, well, what are they? What are new customer needs? Well, customer needs in a way never change. They evolve, and they evolve how they express themselves. So needs like healthcare, deliveries, logistics, education, these things remain, but the delivery and the way that they happen change. And I can't name all the ones that are changing now or will change now, but these are the ones we were talking about in terms of the trends and the areas. And now is a great time, I think, to observe that. And I was going to say you should talk to your customers, and I think obviously you should talk to your customers. That's the best way of finding out what they want, but you can't always talk to them. But you can see these changes happening now. You can see these needs maturing. And I think one of the things that operators need to do, because I think our biggest message from the report we wrote was not just to say all the good things and all the difficulties, but to say, and I'll come on to talk a bit more about the position of telcos. But don't lose sight of the future in dealing with the crisis is kind of one of our big messages here, because there are needs that need to be addressed, and telecoms is in a good place to address it, and is currently actually relatively well off compared to a lot of other industries. And that is not a time to abandon the future and just stick to what we're doing today in crisis management. Clearly you have to do that, but it seems to us, at least from what we can see, that you're doing a very good job of that, and maybe you can use this as an opportunity to do more, which is this last point. I'm talking to Rainer and Markus in preparation for this call. It was amazing to hear, and not just from these guys, from other people I've been speaking to, it's been amazing to hear what some operators are managing to do in terms of preparation and changes, offers that they've launched quickly and so forth, and we'll talk more about that. And you've seen this across industries. It's an opportunity to move faster. And that feeling of vulnerability that you get, and maybe you've heard this talked about the burning platform, I think it's this sense of vulnerability that creates a need to change. And leaders of telcos need to understand that and look forward and take a leadership, take your organizations ahead of the curve. And for us as people, I think there's a lot of lessons here about insight and learning and openness. And that's a feature of stuff that we look at a lot. So these are some of the big messages. I'm going to crack on because we've got a lot to cover. So just as a sort of picture to try and say, why do I think telcos is in a good place? Well, one of the things we did here was we looked at the FT indices, industry indices. So these are share values. And what it showed was that telecommunications of the 10 sectors they covered was actually the least hit. And that was between the 16th of February and the 16th of March. And it went down by just over 10%. Obviously, oil and gas went down a bit more because they had a bit of a war between various countries in that respect, which is a trade war. But I think it's interesting to see that telecoms really was relatively well favoured by the marketplaces, and that's a signal that the marketplace sees telecoms as an industry that is not going to be greatly hit by the virus and the responses to it, or at least at the moment. So quick bit about telcos supporting customers. I think I'm just going to go through this quite quickly because we can come and talk to that with Rainer and Markus. But 4 areas: healthcare and government, consumers, enterprises, and retail. So if we look at healthcare and government, first of all, we see a lot of certainly communications from people like the US carriers about how they're prioritizing frontline responders. I think that's pretty true for most telcos. We're also seeing people like Vodafone offering text updates and population insights, mainly seeing publicity on that from the European carriers, but I suspect it's slightly more widespread than that. For consumers, there have been some great actions here of lifting caps, offering free data. That's been quite widespread around operators. Also, interestingly, waiving payment charges and late payment terms to help people through the crisis, extra entertainment education services. We can hear a little bit of that, I think, from Dialog, from Rainer, I think, have been doing some of that. And also hotlines and calls for people, so free calls for pensioners from Telstra, free calls to CDC countries in the States, and other offers are like that. And enterprise is a little bit, the situation is a little different. I think what I've seen most operators offering has been extra capacity and helping customers out quickly with stuff. One interesting one was Telstra, who offered SMBs extra conferencing and marketing facilities a deal, but I haven't dug deeply enough to know that lots of people are doing offers. And clearly in retail and customer premises, there's been a lot of activity and action to try and limit personal contact and the spread from that. So I'm going to hand back to Amy now and move on to the section where we're going to talk more to Markus and Rainer.
Thank you. Well, I'll just be very quick. I just wanted to, obviously we've got Markus and Rainer here. Not everyone may be familiar with their markets. So I'll just do a very, very brief intro of Elisa in Finland. You can see it on the map there versus Dialog in Sri Lanka, which is red on the map next to it in Asia. And if we compare the markets, just some high level figures, you can see that, population wise, Sri Lanka is bigger, but both of them are mobile market leaders in their markets. Obviously, spending capacity is really different in Northern Europe than it is in Sri Lanka, looking at ARPUs. And in Sri Lanka, they're mainly prepaid subscriptions. So obviously that creates some challenges for people who can't go outside and top up their phones. And finally, just an idea of what's happening in the fixed broadband market share. And so you have an idea of what their enterprise reach is. We sort of categorize them in terms of proportion of enterprise revenue. So that can just be there in the background while we hear a little bit. I think right now, we'll hand over to Rainer. If you can tell us, so how you guys have felt this experience and what kind of things you've been doing to help your customers through this period.
Yeah, thank you again very much for inviting us. I've been looking forward to the session. I've known Andrew and Dean for a while, and it's good to share experiences in these times, which are quite tough for quite everyone. So in terms of our experience, I wanted to share just a few data points, and we can have a discussion in the subsequent minutes. We are just actually now as a company celebrating, you can't call it celebrating, but we are basically entering our 25th anniversary in the country. So that is to say that we have been in the country for a significant amount of time. We are part of the country, and we feel therefore an extremely large responsibility, much beyond just running a business. This may be the case for most of you, I think, as well, but having a 25-year history and having a history which has seen quite many ups and downs, there's an increased sense of responsibility that we feel. Just a year ago, if some of you might recall, we had a very severe incident, which was later called, I think, the Sunday Easter attack, which has brought down the country significantly. And we have been seeing quite some action at the time from our side there. and we have just started to rebound, and now of course there's another hit that everyone is taking. So that is to say that we have a bit of an experience in helping the country, be it a major attack, be it a tsunami, or be it even the civil war that has just ended in 2009. In terms of the specific crisis that we are seeing now, obviously I think all of us, we are working on a couple of fronts. One is to keep up the network and the operations. In our case, we have a complete lockdown. There's different variants of lockdowns, I think, in the different markets, but we have a absolute 100% lockdown. That means everyone is actually only staying at home, and if you are going outside without a curfew passed, then you might end up in jail. So that means we have basically overnight shifted the entire operation to working from home, and it has worked surprisingly well. The efficiency actually we feel has increased as compared to before, and we have seen a lot of resilience of our employees to an extent where we even have to make sure that people are not working too much. Second major topic that I'm going to be talking just a few minutes is the customers offers, where we really need to make sure that everyone is staying connected and not only works from home, but also has some sort of a study and entertainment offer at home. Third major initiative obviously is around the employees and employee safety. I'm not going to be talking much about it, but it's a huge area of concern as well. And of course, the fourth one would be around the investors, which might be a topic for a separate webinar, but also I'm not touching now at this point. In terms of the measures for the customers, for us, I think being a market which is, as you have seen, fairly low ARPU market, we are seeing around $2 ARPU on average, similar to India. As we are close to India, there's quite a similarity. We have to make sure that we are keeping our customers connected. Now more than ever, the networks are the lifeline, in literally the lifeline for many of the people. And we are seeing across around this kind of average ARPU, we obviously see customers which even have a lot lower ARPU, and then we are seeing, of course, more high-end segments as well. So what we are saying is that predominantly the first main concern for us is to keep everyone connected. So we have been using significant analytics and big data to determine the normal usage behavior of our customers, and really make sure that if we see there's a change in the usage behavior to an extent where somebody would all of a sudden stop to use voice, SMS, or data, we would then look and see, and then we would actually give this particular customer on a segment of one basis an offer which matches the usage that he or she had previously. So that is one key thing. And we are talking here not minor measures, we are talking actually millions of customers that we have already given that what we call lifeline of an offer on voice, SMS, as well as data on this one. Second main is to make sure that everyone is supported to work from home. That obviously means that we are seeing a lot increased data usage. In our case, the data usage actually has gone up on the home front, on the fixed and fixed wireless front, 25%. So we are offering for the same price double data. We are shifting on the corporate side data that they would normally have used for the head offices. We're shifting it to basically the home usage for their employees. We are having significant reconnection offers for customers that previously had a home connection and stopped using it because they already have the router. And we're giving significant discounts on things like Office 365 and flat rates for specific services, as well as conferencing solutions. The third one is study from home. So we have a significant initiative, which also is jointly done with the government, on supporting all the students, from the young ones to the old ones, to be able to study from home. We have actually programmed a dedicated application to make access to all the study material for the school children. We have whitelisted all the education websites and applications, so that actually there's zero data usage charged for any of those websites where a student would use. Fourth main one is on the entertainment side. As we are the market leader by far also in pay TV, we have seen that TV is really an important medium, obviously for news, as well as to get some stress relief with a good movie. And so we have given now all TV channels for free. As well as we are giving all IPTV, both the data as well as the content for free. So that really is a significant part, and I think takes customers in these times through some of the stress that people are having. Obviously, we are supporting government initiatives as well. For example, a pre-call announcement to indicate stay at home when we started the curfew. We're having free calls to medical hotlines, as well as we have free information services that we provide. And last but not least, I think, as Amy, you mentioned, we are in a prepaid market quite not yet at a level where everyone would be able to pay online. So we do see constraints on not being able to actually go to a shop and reload a mobile phone. So on the one side, obviously, we encourage digital reloads. We have all the means in place with a debit card, with a credit card, with the net banking to reload the phone. But we are also seeing that some people are not able. That's why, as my first point, I said those people we are actually giving a lifeline for free. And for the postpaid base that we have on mobile as well as on fixed, we are extending credit limits, actually more or less indefinitely. We are not disconnecting during the curfew time at all. And we are just making sure that people are aware of their charge, because obviously if you build up your bill, then you need to make sure that afterwards there's nobody running into a bill shock. So overall, this has helped, I think, to connect and keep everyone connected. We see drop on mobile voice in terms of both revenue. We see an increase in the usage due to the free promotions that we are giving. On mobile data, we see pretty much a flat revenue, but we see an incremental usage of about 25%. And interestingly, or not surprisingly, the usage pattern actually has dramatically changed. We have seen earlier a morning peak and an evening peak due to the nighttime data that we are giving, and that has actually maintained the peak, but the daytime usage has much increased. So we see a much more overall utilized network as compared to before. But we are also reaching the limits. So that is a concern that, of course, all of us, we have to work on to make sure that we are keeping the connectivity across the entire base, even in busy hour. It would be a short summary for where we are in Sri Lanka.
Super. Thank you so much for that overview and hearing about what you're doing for your customers. And definitely we can come back to that in a bit more detail when we get some questions in the Q&A period. So now let's hand over to Markus, because I think especially on we've got some good slides for you on what you're seeing in terms of the network usage from Elisa. So I'll put that forward and let you talk a little bit about your experience, Markus.
All right, thank you very much. It was interesting to hear Rainer's story about Sri Lanka. A little bit different scenarios there, and as we compare Finland to Sri Lanka, in Finland we are in a world that free and or not free but unlimited data. So our pricing is more of a speed-based pricing. So we don't have this kind of data caps in our services, and that in a way helps us in this situation. Now the people can use the data as much as they can, and we are used to in our network to handle the data. And as my background is from the service assurance side, I'm coming a little bit different angle here, telling more a little bit about the technical perspective and how our services are running, and a few examples of those. Here you can see from the beginning of March, as we progressed in Finland towards lockdown, where something like in the middle of March, you can see the mobile data volume. The first few weeks there has been a level that has risen up at the 16th of March up to 20%. And if we look at the mobile data peak traffic or daily volumes, or the fixed data, the peak traffic or daily volumes, at the front of the lockdown, we lift up or increase the data about 20 to 30% in our networks. And in the simultaneous mobile calls on the top right corner, we even see double amount of simultaneous calls after some spikes or peak hours after some government information. But overall, like roughly 60% more simultaneous calls in our network. So, same things in our IPTV services, 15 to 10%. And what's interesting also from the corporate side and our own usage also, the simultaneous VPN users have come up at the moment 130%. And all this has actually stayed at that level now. So the customer behavior changed, like Rainer said, it changed the pattern of the day. We usually had the peak hours on the afternoon or late evenings, and now we see the amount of data going up already in the mornings as people are remote working and the kids are home. And it's like more of a we use the capacity now through the days more evenly. Of course, we have the peak hours there, but it's more evenly distributed. And so it has been quite stable now. We have reached the level of 20 to 30%, and it's been stable there. And at the same time, we haven't recognized or seen any service disruptions in our network, and the capacity is there and doing well. And the one thing I wanted to mention here is that we are quite much doing this kind of automation in our network, and that is something that's actually keeping us quite resilient in these times. For example, in these times, so that with automation we can be quite proactive and fast and do the correct changes to respond to this kind of situations. And at the same time, we can focus the people that we have, the experts, on the things that need more focus, more expert focus. For example, in some of the individual base stations now, because of the customer behavior change, there are some base stations in 4G, for example, that we need the capacity actions, and we are planning those as fast as possible. So we can, at the time, we can make sure that our customer gets the services that we have promised at the current normal level as before, through the automation that actually predicts and prevents the things that might come to us as an incident. And at the left graph, you can see over the years we have been doing this quite a long time. So the amount of incidents has come down 50% per year, and it's mainly due to the preventive actions we have been doing at the same time to our network. And there are some numbers on the right side also about the progress we have been doing, and we don't see no change at the moment doing this similar actions now. As we are working from home, actually, it's just a little bit change for the people that are used to go to the office earlier, but now we can do the quite much the same things as working from home.
Thank you very much for that, Markus. Really interesting to see the traffic patterns on your network, and I'm sure lots of people will be jealous at how automated Elisa's operations are right now. So recognize that we're a little bit behind schedule, so we will go through the future scenarios now and then hand over to questions afterwards, and we'll do our best to get through your questions. And please do start sending them in now, and I will put them to our panel very shortly. All right, off to you, Dean.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so I'm going to get to look at this from the sort of futurist perspective. And to be honest, at the moment, it's difficult to look at 5 days, let alone 5 years. But these are 4 scenarios that we're starting to think about, just because, you know, even though we have to be focused on the here and now and the immediate side of both the operations on the network and also the implications for customers and employees, where people have the scope to have half an eye on what might occur next, it's worth at least sort of preparing the ground to think about things. And obviously there's a lot of unknowns and each country and operator has its own very specific contexts. But our perspective is that it's worth at least starting to set up some thought experiments to start allowing to plan for what we could think of as possible futures. And these are scenarios, not forecasts. They're essentially frameworks to start thinking about what things might look like 2021, 2022 and beyond. Amy, if you could populate the chart with the scenarios, please. So we've sort of identified, you know, 4 options, and you know, we probably could have done 3 or 5 or 10, but I think these are ones where the main variables here are: how does the world deal with the epidemiology, either in terms of effective treatments? Does the virus keep recurring? How long does it take to do that? And the other side is the economic fallout and how long that takes to recover. And that also plays into what happens with consumer and business behavior, and also how governments and regulators treat the new world, and not just on telecoms, but on, you know, healthcare and critical infrastructure and so on. So our central scenario is what we call back to almost normal, and that essentially is, you know, with minor modifications, where we were 6 months ago, but then probably having a 1 to 2 year lag because of economic fallout effects. But even on that, as I'll come on to in a second, there will be some changes around what that means for 5G, for IoT, for consumer and business services, and the role of different service providers, particularly if some have perhaps faced financial challenges. Maybe we'll have more government intervention directly in some cases, and so on. The other 2 less positive ones, I'll just quickly highlight those. The fragmented and the weakened distance. These are the less good scenarios. Fragmented, as the name suggests, is pointing out that some places will weather the storm better than others. You know, at the moment, it looks like China and South Korea have everything under control. Europe has clear issues, and so does the US. And that may well play back into all sorts of different challenges on a varying basis, which all relate to the time of the economy to recover, but also government action, and also critically here, consumer behavior and perception about how quickly it is possible and realistic to repopulate urban areas and social venues, and also from an enterprise point of view, what the relative recovery rates are in different parts of the economy, where you've got perhaps retail on one side and you know, healthcare and utilities, and indeed telecoms itself on the other. The weakened distance scenario is our dystopian one, where essentially we don't manage to get the virus properly under control. We have continued flare-ups, and essentially we mostly retreat into a permanent social distancing environment in a lot of the world. That's one that I don't particularly want to think about, but we have to acknowledge that it's a possibility. And the last one, where we've also got a second axis here, which is around collaborative approach between countries and nations. This is perhaps more of the utopian glass half full side, where we actually come out of this where some of the trade battles and geopolitical issues of the last few years dissipate in the wake of successful treatment of the epidemic. But also we perhaps get more bandwidth to think about things like climate change. And actually, obviously, CO2 emissions have gone down massively at the moment because of less transport and travel and less industry. That's perhaps not been a sustainable reduction, but perhaps as we rebuild industries, that becomes more coordinated, and there become more roles for telecom service providers as part of that. Amy, if you could answer. Thanks. So what we've done in the report, and I don't have time to go through all of this separately, is there's sort of like about 10 different categories that we've thought about for each of these scenarios, what could happen. And obvious ones are around 5G and fixed networks, but we also go through looking at consumer and enterprise services, what happens with regulation, IoT, and there's some things here that we may come out as being unexpected. Some are relatively obvious. So 5G is an area that I focus on a lot. The standards are slightly delayed at the moment, and we think there's going to be, even under the realistic scenario, a push out of some of the deployments, but also, as Andrew mentioned, the consumer and business uptake, either because people can't go to retail stores to try and get a new phone, or it's not just simply an economic priority, especially for those who are newly unemployed or underemployed. I think that will take some time to work its way through the system. But if you look back from 2025 point of view, I think that will have largely rectified itself, although some of the more advanced features in release 7.16, 17, 18 will be pushed out and to the right. So I don't think we'll have quite the same multi-dimensional network slicing, and some of the really cool vertical specific features may take longer to get to market, particularly at scale and particularly on a global level. There'll be differences again between maybe between China and other markets, but I think that we have to be realistic about. On the fixed network side, I think that almost under all of these scenarios, as we're all proving at the moment, there's going to need to be a renewed focus on fixed networks, particularly in countries where perhaps that's not been a traditional strength. And I think we may well find that that's an area for government intervention, perhaps financing and stimulus packages as well. I think regulatory is an interesting one, because here it comes down to desire to protect the telecoms industry as it is today, but also to make sure that it improves in future. I think one of the things that we're likely to see in almost all of the scenarios is perhaps something that's akin to what happened after the 2008 financial crash, where the banks had much more diligence from regulators on things like stress testing and simulations. And I think that may well occur in other areas of critical infrastructure. And so there may well be sort of standardized metrics for what if, how do we deal with a sudden increase in demand or a sudden unexpected change in demand patterns, whether that's between urban centers and residential, between fixed and mobile. And it'd be interesting to see if there are a set of standardized tests that emerge from that. I think clearly on the enterprise side, there's going to be more focus on certain verticals than others from a telecoms point of view. Healthcare, logistics, I think is going to be a really important one. I'll come back to that in a second. Government-run verticals, perhaps, or government influence or public sector, including education and critical infrastructure. I think we're going to see more emphasis on smart cities. And also, I think that depending on the outcome of the virus and economy, we will see a more or less permissive regime on things like mergers and acquisitions, consolidation, and perhaps things like net neutrality. And also, I think perhaps less focus on, or rather a renewed focus on expediency in deploying networks rather than barriers to putting in fixed or mobile infrastructure. I don't think too many local authorities are going to be worrying about the aesthetics of a small cell as much as they were in the past, for example, if that's a determining factor for whether something gets deployed. One thing I would say on the business side is that the economy as a whole is likely to move from a focus on things like just in time and getting every single last percentage point of optimization out of the economy to resilience and just in case. And I think there will be a lot more attempts to look at what if scenarios for supply chains, for critical infrastructure. And I think that the telecoms industry will have an important role to play in helping other organizations look at how they can restructure their international coordination, trade and collaboration, as well as domestic as well. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of new emphasis on IoT, depending on economic strength in different markets. And I think that may well take on slightly different tones to what we expect. So I think there's going to be a premium on, if you like, contactless solutions. So I think we can expect to see more voice activated and proximity sensing devices and terminals in public spaces. Maybe in some scenarios, more autonomous vehicles of one form or another, whether that is, as already seen in China, cloud robots used for disinfecting public areas, perhaps more use of drones, as it's already been seen, but perhaps at a larger scale. I'm not sure about autonomous cars being necessarily a priority, but I think that given apart from in the really positive scenario, but I think that we'll see a lot of adjacent technology and services which can potentially then feed through into opportunities for service providers. But as I say, all of these are long-term scenarios, and they are scenarios, not forecasts. And in the report, which you can download after this, you'll see we go into each of these areas in more depth. Andrew, maybe you had a word to say on the coordination aspects of
that. Not that I can really easily cram into 2 minutes, so I think it's quite covered in the report. I mean,
okay.
I think in that case, we've got some. I'm gonna cut you off, Andrew, so we can get to questions, because we've already overrun, as always happens in these things. And these are some of the things that we can watch out for as turning points, but they're quite self-explanatory and available in the slides. So I think I will start handing out some questions now, since we've had quite a few. Now, one of the first ones that I'll ask, which I've had in different guises from different people, is sort of how, and this is for both Markus and Rainer, how are you guys either working with or managing IPTV content or on-demand video in terms of downgrades from high definition to standard definition? And in some cases, it sounds as though the telcos are making this decision. In other cases, it's the broadcasters that are making this decision. But what are you guys doing to handle that extra traffic in terms of, managing the picture quality or specs?
Shall I start, Markus?
Go ahead.
So we have actually at 1st of January this year, much before anyone would have expected where we are now, launched a YouTube flat rate for less than $1, which gives you 24/7 YouTube watching for 1 month. We have launched this product to make sure, like I mentioned earlier, that everyone in the country, even the lowest wallet, can watch videos, hopefully also education videos. And the resolution that we have found to work very well on a mobile phone is a 360p video. We are secondly also providing our IPTV experience. The brand name here is called View. That is an experience that works on a mobile, on a tablet, and on a TV through Android TV. Here we see that this application, which carries both live TV as well as VOD, is highly regarded now in the country, and we have a promotion right now running, as I mentioned in the outline, where we are giving through that application as well the content as well the data completely free. Similar resolution, we are giving this free offer for mobile on 360, and if someone uses the IPTV at home through Android TV HDMI stick, we are providing a 480p experience. Obviously, if you wanted to have an HD quality, you will have to pay a bit more. But as a free offer and as a YouTube flat, like I mentioned, the experience that we see works very well. And obviously, from a network perspective, if I look at that aspect, there can be smart network traffic management, whereby you're looking at how do you prioritize a critical service versus such a streaming service, where we know that both YouTube as well as our own client obviously have adaptive bit rates, so we can make sure that everyone in a busy hour, in a busy cell, is being served appropriately also. So that's the main one. We haven't seen the same one as in UK and other countries, where then from the provider side, the OTTs have started to throttle down. That has not yet happened here. Maybe we have to work for this one as well. But from our side, what we can do is to provide such a service already.
Okay, and from Elisa's side, we are seeing this as normal. So we are actually providing our Elisa. It's a viihde in Finnish. It's Elisa Entertainment IPTV service, and and with the HD quality. So, and in overall, we are not touching the content or throttle it down. On the opposite, we are actually also, if we talk about the video usage of the people that are using it from remote working, also we are encouraging people to use video because it's more socially friendly to see people's faces, and like here we are now with videos on, so that maybe tells a little bit about the situation. But of course we see some of the challenges, like I mentioned earlier, coming from the access side, home networks, and how to handle those and how to help our customers and citizens in those problems, and that's what we are focusing on.
Thank you. Now,
one comment just made to this one just quickly. There has been always a discussion fixed versus fixed wireless, just to say, and we have both in the country as a provider, but we have seen actually much to our I would say a positive notion that a fixed wireless video proposition works very well. So we are running on 2.3 gigahertz. We have a nice band that we can use. Pure 4G, there's no 3G that we are providing, is all on 4G. And we are seeing, like this particular session, even now I'm running on a fixed wireless proposition. The last 3 weeks we have used video basically 24/7. There was not a single glitch. So I can recommend everyone that is contemplating a fiber versus a fixed wireless, look seriously into fixed wireless. It works very well if you have 20 megahertz or more. So that is really something that is a learning for maybe for some others.
Thank you very much. We've had another question that is, I mean, quite interesting. We've had it in a couple of different guises as well. Is, have you guys seen these changes impact on your supply chain strategy or decisions, or do you have any ideas of how you think this is going to affect how you work with vendors going forward?
Maybe if I start right now. So in the supply chain and all the link from end to end, of course we are following that closely. That's something from our preparedness work at this situation, extraordinary situation, and at the moment we don't see problems in it, but we are of course doing things to make sure that there won't be any problems in the supply chain. So for example, where do we get the devices for some vendor if there are some shortages or close downs in some factories or something like that, or how do we do the air travel or the of the supplies or the gears to Finland and so forth. So it's a part of the preparedness work, but at the moment no challenges in that sense.
Yeah, so I think the question is a very good one, definitely, because like Markus was saying, we need to have an eye end-to-end, and end-to-end means not only the supplier side in the country of origin, like for example China. At the time when there was a lockdown, we would obviously have to look what is happening and is there alternate markets we can source from. The other one is the logistics to your own place, and then the third one is certainly the import regulation, because let's face it, if the countries are starting to close down further, there might be a situation where even from a, let's say, financial perspective, some countries might not want to have a capital outflow that much anymore, and that might affect imports as well. So we need to look at the end-to-end chain. And even once you have it in customs to deliver the goods and services, not only to your own network location, if you wanted to use a network element, or but even then the distribution of the goods and of the goods to the customers, like a handset or a CPE or a set-top box. So all these are concerns which I definitely think are worthwhile having a very close eye on. and make sure that at least there's always an alternate wherever possible. Obviously, customs and those things, you don't have an alternate, but for a supply side as well as for a delivery and distribution side, we need to have a more than one channel in place.
Thank you both for those insights. Now, another one that I've had is sort of on the angle of how you guys are working with governments and regulators and what they are asking of you. And that might, sort of from different angles. For instance, how does it change collaboration with your peers in the market? How are you dealing with any kind of cybersecurity issues? For instance, like hacking on Zoom chats, and lots of different angles that you could cover this from. But if you could tell us sort of in each of your markets what the sort of work with government and regulators is focusing on, that'd be great.
Maybe shortly about the government. Actually, we have had a history of doing a good cooperation in terms of the government and the peers in certain society critical things that we are handling. The one that we are seeing also that our government is telling, and the officials that telling to the citizens also that don't worry, that the networks will handle the amount of traffic that is increasing due to the change in this particular situation. So that's a good message, and of course we are telling that also, but it's good that it's coming from the officials also. And a cybersecurity point of view, of course, there are people that are using this situation, and that is sad. And there are a lot of this kind of phishing messages coming in with the COVID-19, and people are using the consumers, the scared consumers about that, and try to make them click the links that they shouldn't be, for example.
Yeah, on our side, similar. We have quite a close collaboration and history with the government bodies. There is a reason to seeing that Sri Lanka is right now about the 5th cheapest data country in the entire world. As you have seen, our ARPU around $2. We are basically from a cost or from a price per GB that a customer is paying pretty much the cheapest in the entire world, while the industry actually is a healthy one. We are having a close to 100% 4G penetration. We are starting 5G, so there's a significant investment capacity maintained. So that comes with it comes on the back of a good, I think, interplay between the industry and the regulator. In terms of the specific incident here, clearly there's a very close tab. For example, when it is about announcements, like I mentioned earlier, we have a pre-call announcement when it's about hotlines, when it is about, for example, giving free news alerts that we are sending out for free every day or multiple times a day. What time is the curfew starting, and what people are doing, and how many COVID patients have been detected, which is very transparently communicated here in the country, at least on a day, even on an hourly basis almost. If it's about measures, making sure that we are keeping a lifeline to all of our customers, even the ones that have very little capacity to pay, or even have no capacity to pay at this point in time, where we have the distribution issues for the reloads. So that is done, I think, fairly well, and it is certainly for us a time where we are investing now in order to make sure that the industry as a whole. We didn't talk much about B2B, but that's the other big area where we are, of course, having to make sure that we are looking into that we are coming out of this, hopefully in one of the more positive scenarios that Dean was presenting. Maybe what we are seeing, all of us, is I call it a catalyst towards a full digital and analytics-driven telco world. We see this clearly. Everything that we have is done through an app. Not everyone, unfortunately, uses the app yet, because there are some feature phones customers in the country still, but it's a complete digital operation that we can do from our side. It's a complete digital operation that the customer can do. And now we are starting also to see the digital money coming in. Recently, there has been changes even with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to really further support e-money. And I think all of this actually now increases the speed of transformation that was up for happening. And maybe that is a moment for seeing some of the more positive scenarios coming up rather than the doom scenario that Dean was presenting as well.
Well, I think that hope for something positive is a good note for us to finish on. So we are just about going to finish on time, everybody. Apologies to those whose questions we didn't have time to answer, but we will put them to the relevant person and try and at least share that in a Q&A doc that will be made available. As a final thing, I will just say that because things are changing so quickly and it's really interesting, there's lots to hear, we're going to try and do this again in a month. So you can see the registration link there, and it may be with Markus and Rainer again, or maybe with some other people that's still to be determined. But thank you everybody, especially Markus and Rainer, for coming to share your thoughts, and thank you everyone for listening, and we look forward to chatting again in a month.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.